Imagine it's 1918. The world is slowly recovering from the horrors of World War I, and all eyes are on the promise of peace. But suddenly a new enemy emerges, one without a face or an army, quietly destroying everything in its path. Disease spreads through the streets. Friends and families fall ill without warning, and anxiety turns into real fear. This is the Spanish flu, the pandemic that swept across the globe just as people were yearning for peace. In this video, we'll take you back to those dark days to uncover how it all began, how this deadly virus mutated, and how it forever altered the course of history. In early 1918, as World War I raged on, a new illness emerged in military camps in Kansas, USA. At first, the illness seemed unremarkable, resembling the seasonal flu that soldiers often caught. Doctors noted the typical symptoms: fever, cough, and fatigue, and dismissed it as a mild case of influenza. The soldiers quickly returned to the front lines, and life seemed to go on as usual. But what no one realized at the time was that this was the beginning of something far more sinister. Unbeknownst to anyone, the virus was mutating and growing stronger. By the spring of 1918, similar cases started to appear across Europe, carried by American soldiers to the front lines. Soon, reports of the illness were coming from cities across the continent, and doctors could no longer ignore the mounting threat. The virus was spreading at an alarming rate, and the number of infected people was growing rapidly. But the worst was yet to come. This virus harbored a dark secret that would soon be revealed, bringing with it a devastating cost to the world. The stage was set for one of the deadliest pandemics in history. As the virus spread across Europe, it initially seemed to follow the patterns of a typical flu season. The first wave, which lasted from the spring to early summer of 1918, was mild in comparison to what would come later. Although many people fell ill, the death rate was relatively low, and most recovered within a few days. Governments and military leaders were more focused on the ongoing war, and the flu was not yet seen as a significant threat. However, as summer approached, the virus appeared to retreat, and many believed the worst was over. Soldiers returned to the front lines, and civilians resumed their daily lives, unaware that the virus was quietly continuing to evolve. What no one realized was that this lull was merely the calm before the storm. The virus was biding its time, mutating and gaining strength as it moved from host to host. By the time summer turned into autumn, the virus had transformed into something far deadlier. Due to the strict media censorship imposed by the warring nations during World War I, Spain, which was neutral, was among the first countries to publish detailed reports about the pandemic. This led the world to believe that Spain was the center of the outbreak, and the illness was named the Spanish flu. However, the virus did not originate in Spain, but spread globally afterward. The second wave of the Spanish flu was about to hit the world with unprecedented force, leaving no corner of the globe untouched. By the fall of 1918, the Spanish flu had transformed into something far more lethal. The virus had mutated, becoming deadlier and spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. This time, it didn't just target the elderly or those with weak immune systems. It began to strike down young, healthy adults, including soldiers in the prime of their lives. The second wave of the pandemic swept across the globe like wildfire, leaving behind a staggering number of victims. Hospitals were overwhelmed, and death came quickly and brutally. Patients suffered from high fevers, body aches, and bloody coughing fits. In many cases, the flu caused the skin of victims to turn a dark blue due to a lack of oxygen. Many people died within hours of showing symptoms, and towns and cities could not cope with the rising number of deaths. Fear and panic gripped the streets. Families could not even say goodbye to their loved ones for fear of catching the illness themselves, and mass graves became a common sight. As the virus spread across every continent, governments began enforcing quarantines, closing schools and churches, and banning public gatherings. But these measures came too late for many, as the second wave of the Spanish flu became the deadliest phase of the pandemic. By early 1919, the third wave of the Spanish flu had begun, though it was far less deadly than the catastrophic second wave. Still, the virus continued to spread among exhausted populations, many of whom had lost loved ones and lived in constant fear of death. As time passed, cases gradually declined and the pandemic slowly lost its grip. Communities began to return to a sense of normalcy, but the world was forever changed. In the end, the virus faded away as mysteriously as it had appeared. Although there was no effective cure or vaccine at the time, people managed to adapt, and public health measures, combined with the body's natural immunity, eventually helped contain the spread. The death toll was estimated to be between 50 and 100 million people, far more than the casualties of World War I. The world that emerged from the pandemic was radically different. The flu had forever altered the way people viewed public health, and humanity learned a harsh lesson about its vulnerability to infectious diseases. The Spanish flu remains etched in history as one of the most devastating catastrophes the world has ever witnessed. The Spanish flu left behind more than just a staggering death toll. It reshaped the future of medicine, public health, and how societies respond to crises. In the wake of the pandemic, governments around the world realized the importance of early detection, prevention, and international cooperation in fighting infectious diseases. Public health systems were strengthened, and the field of epidemiology gained newfound importance as scientists and doctors worked tirelessly to understand how such a deadly virus had spread so quickly and with such devastating effects. On a personal level, millions of families had been torn apart, leaving behind orphans, widows, and grieving communities. The psychological scars of the pandemic ran deep, especially as it followed on the heels of the trauma of World War I. People were forced to confront the fragility of life in ways they had never imagined before. Fear of new pandemics lingered, and this fear shaped societal behavior for years to come. Despite its overwhelming impact, the Spanish flu was often overshadowed by the war and has since been underrepresented in popular memory. However, its lessons remain relevant, particularly as the world continues to face new global health challenges. The Spanish flu stands as a reminder of both the dangers of pandemics and the resilience of humanity in the face of overwhelming odds.